this session. Thank you all for coming today to our Tejano virtual event. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Awesome. So welcome to Tejano Virtual Events. We're going to have a great presentation for you today. We have EPCC history professor and librarian, Dr. Melissa Esmacher, who will be speaking on strengthening critical and information skills of history students with library instruction. So for attending today's workshop, you're also going to have the opportunity to earn Tejano passport points. So during the workshop, you're going to see that I'll place a code in the chat box that you're able to get points for attending today. I'll share more about this after the workshop. So if you would just get comfortable, mute your mic, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box or raise your hand. And again, just keep a lookout on your chat box later on during the workshop, and I'll put in that code. So whenever you're ready, Dr. Esmacher, you can begin.
Hello, everybody. Let me go ahead and get the presentation up. All right. Okay, can everybody see the presentation and hear me okay?
Yes.
Beautiful, thank you. All right, so welcome. Thank you guys so much for having me today to talk about the intersection of history and the library. Particularly, what I'm going to be talking about is an initiative that comes out of the history department that's going to be involving a close working relationship with the library. We're going to talk a little bit about a pilot we're doing this semester and about full rollout that we intend to do in the fall. All right. Looks like my PowerPoint format is a little mixed up, but that's okay. First I'll introduce myself for those who I have not met. My name is Dr. Melissa Esmacher. I am a tenured professor of history at EPCC's Northwest Campus. I have worked in history, particularly as a point of contact for core curriculum assessment. So I'm very familiar with history's assessment process, which is where this library initiative is coming out of. So I'll speak a little bit about that experience. I've also been a librarian part-time since January 2025. I graduated with my degree in information science from the University of North Texas in December, and literally just accepted a position to move over to the library full-time in library technical services at EPCC starting in August. I'll still be adjuncting in history, and so I'll still be very deeply involved in both areas. So yeah, I'm excited to join the library team. All right. So let me first explain kind of the background where this history and library matchup comes from. So history as a department has to, just like any other department, assess student learning outcomes, right? To make sure that the learning outcomes that we have in our syllabus, that students are actually learning what we say they're learning. And in history, we have both student learning outcomes, and then because history is part of the core curriculum, at least the US and world history sequences, core learning outcomes. And increasingly, history is trying to sort of unify it so those assessments are the same. They're mostly overlapping in terms of the skills that they're asking students to demonstrate. So generally, history's assessment process looks like this. Students have to do a written response because written communication is one of the important skills history does assess. And they have to analyze sources. Now, which sources the assessment focuses on, we're going to talk a little bit more about today, but that's kind of the gist of it. The idea is that this student learning outcome assessment is going to see how students communicate in writing, see how they use their critical thinking skills to make an argument using evidence from the past, and specifically from primary and secondary sources. The goal of the student learning assessment for EPCC is that at least 70% of students will perform at least a 2.5 score out of a 4-point scale. And the last time that history assessed student learning outcomes, basically every instructor who taught whatever section, or excuse me, whatever history class was up, whether it's 1301, 1302, 2321, 2322, whichever class was up for assessment that particular semester, each instructor had to assign, design an assignment that hit these metrics, and then they had to report usually between 5 to 7 students from their roster based on random roster numbers. So like 3, 5, 20, etc. And the goal was to kind of see again, can this random sampling of students actually demonstrate that history is doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are we having a good success rate? So the last time history assessed 1301 and 1302, the assessment team behind the student learning outcome assessment noticed a correlation. One of the things that the reporting form asked instructors about, in addition to what the CRN was, what the format or modality of the class was, so like online, dual credit, on campus, etc. One question it did ask them was, did you send your students to the library at any point? Did you use like the writing or tutoring center, right? Trying to kind of see what sort of outside the classroom supports did instructors require students to do. And what they noticed was there was a correlation between the CRNs where students generally had higher scores and the instructors who required their students to go to the library. Now, I want to have the caveat that there wasn't a whole lot of more detailed information other than send my students to the library. So, what exactly does that mean? The form didn't really go into detail to ask that, just some kind of library involvement. Okay, so we have a little bit of information, but not the full picture. And so, what the team decided to do was they're like, okay, is this correlation or causation? We don't have enough data to know, right? But what they wanted to do was to find out. So, the next time history is scheduled to do a SLO assessment is fall 2026. And they decided that all CRNs, every single history class that EPCC offers in the fall, is going to have a library session. Now, what these look like, we'll talk about throughout this presentation. But there's also stipulation of a timeline that this session has to occur in the first 25% of the semester. Okay, so the first quarter of the semester. All classes, again, regardless of whether they're 16-week, 8-week, the late starts, etc., all classes have to do this. And rather than every single instructor having to report student data for random roster numbers, basically, we're going to get IR involved to pull students via random sampling. Okay, and then they're going to be basically the responses rather than have the instructor self-report grades, which is what they were doing before, because we're having far less responses to analyze. There's going to be the assessment committee is going to basically norm together and grade the submissions. So it's designed to be a much more sort of even, less onerous process for the instructors who previously, as I can tell you, working on assessment, especially our dual credit instructors are like assessed to death because they have to do college assessment, they have to do K through 12 assessment. So we're trying to make everyone's lives easier but still fulfill the duty of figuring out whether students are learning what they're supposed to be learning. All right. In particular, what the assessment team wanted to do was to narrow down what kinds of sources students were going to be assessed on their ability to analyze. And so they decided that for History 1301, the student will identify and analyze a secondary source. So I do have to explain here in case you got any English folks in the house. History uses the labels primary and secondary sources in a distinct way that is different from English. So for history, a primary source, which History 1302 students are required to analyze, a primary source is a source that's from the time period that we're studying. So for example, if we are studying the American Revolution, Something like the Declaration of Independence would be considered a primary source because it's from that time period, right? It's created by the people who are living that history. A secondary source is anything that's about the time period or the topic we're looking at, but it's written later. So, for example, most of the books on our shelves in the library, or if you go to Barnes and Noble, right, or a documentary, these are examples of secondary sources. So, they're created by people looking at primary sources, right, and kind of creating this narrative and analysis, but they're not from the time period. So, that's really the big separation between a primary and secondary sources when they're created. So anything from the time period we're looking at in history that was created then is a primary source. It doesn't necessarily have to be a first person narrative like English oftentimes requires it to be. So the goal for the SLO assessment team was basically to say, okay, we are going to see how well History 1301 students can identify and analyze a secondary source. And then for History 1302 students, we're going to use a primary source. And a lot of the determination in making that, because even though they look at both of these kinds of sources in both classes, History 1301, because it's US history to 1877, involves a lot of old school English. And sometimes it's a stretch to translate into modern English for our students, especially our students who English is not their first language. So we figured that it was just going to be easier for everybody if we picked secondary sources for History 1301. All right. So, what we ended up doing to prepare for this, because this is going to launch in fall of 2026, is I worked together with Laura Leon Breeze, who's currently one of the designated librarians for history at EPCC. Is we took an existing LibGuide that had been developed, I believe, as part of the Pathways project many years ago. We basically took it, rebooted it, redeveloped it, added on to it. And so this is now sort of our standard history LibGuide. It can be used by any of the instructors teaching history, whether on campus, off campus, etc. The PowerPoint does have a link to it. So if anybody wants to see the PowerPoint or get the direct link to it, I can do that. I'm trying to think whether it'll let me. Okay. So I was going to see if I could pop the link in the chat, but I don't want to multitask too much. I'm not that familiar with Blackboard Collaborate. Anyways, so the idea is that if an instructor does not have a library research guide customized for their class, they can use this one, and that it kind of collects together all of the history related resources at the library in one place. So history specific articles and databases, tabs that show the library's ebook collection, websites, again, those that have sort of been like pre-cleared and vetted by history instructors. We also have links to, oh, thank you so much. Kristen has dropped the link in the chat. There's also links to talk about a little bit about local history research and primary sources, about El Paso history, writing and citation tools, and then evaluating resources. So the idea was to kind of make this a one-stop shop for instructors because not every instructor is necessarily going to want to fully integrate the library in the way that librarians wish they would, but they got to fulfill this requirement to incorporate the library. So the idea was that this could be used by any of the librarians or any of the history instructors to serve in preparation for this session. Okay. All right, so there are a couple different options that history instructors are going to have to fulfill this requirement that students have some library interfacing within the first 25% of the semester. So these options were developed in consultation with the history department and also with some librarians, particularly Miss Lombrise and myself. One option is a partial class session in the regular classroom. As a librarian, I would not say this is 100% my first choice, but there were some history instructors who were like, you know what, I've done this in the past where I've had the librarian come in and talk to my class for 15 minutes about the what the library resources have to offer very briefly. And I don't want to commit any more class time than that. Again, we decided, the history department went back and forth on that to decide whether that was going to be sufficient or not to meet the requirement. The full session, either in the campus library or on site, so in other words, bringing the students to the library or taking the librarian to the students, in the case of our on site dual credit and early college high school classes. And then also an option to have that same full class session where it's a normal sort of traditional 50-minute or 80-minute instructional time period, and have it held synchronously online. The idea behind that one is that will easily help to fulfill the requirement for instructors who are teaching online sections. We've also had some interest in this from some of our early college high school partners that they're like, hey, you know, I have my class from this time to this time. It would be a pain in the butt to like call my students over to campus. Can I just, because they're all have their laptops anyways, can we just do it live in class online? And the other idea behind those is that you can record it, because if you're teaching an online class, you cannot make synchronous sessions mandatory. So that's the other beauty of this kind of session, is that you can record it and make that recording available on Blackboard later to students who couldn't attend live. Another option, particularly for our competency-based education modality, is pre-recorded library modules. So when the history department joined the Tejano Flex initiative to offer competency-based education classes in history in which students can move through at their own pace by demonstrating mastery of different competencies to complete a course, we wanted to make sure that the library was included in that as well. And so Laura Leon Breeze worked with me to design library modules that we put in the LibGuide for students to be able to get the same kinds of information they would in a live session with a librarian pre-recorded. And in talking with the history department, for a lot of professors who were very reluctant to fork over class time because class time is often very precious, this was seen as a nice sort of compromise solution, because we could say, well, maybe just make it an assignment that you put in Blackboard. You have your students watch one or all of the videos, whatever your preference, and you can fulfill their requirements that way. So really the goal of all of this was to make it so that we could essentially fulfill that requirement for any history instructor. And again, because this is the first time offering it, there wasn't really any guide rails that the history department has said you must interface with the library in this way. So it'll be interesting to see which options professors go with. Definitely, I'm going to see about sending out a survey to history instructors to kind of get a sense for which of these interventions will be the most popular. All right. So again, because the history department is, how do I say this, a strong supporter of academic freedom and not telling instructors how to teach, there were literally no guidelines in how the students exactly interface with the library. So how can instructors use the library? Again, we're leaving it up to instructors, but one of the things that I'm going to be suggesting, Laura Lee and I are actually running a version of this session for history instructors during Faculty Development Week in August. If you're a librarian and you're likely to be working with history instructors, I strongly recommend you to come to that one so we can start playing matchmaker between librarians and instructors. But basically, we want to empower the instructors to use the library in the way they see fit to support their students and their classes. So there are a couple different options that I'm going to suggest. Again, mileage may vary on individual instructor which one they choose. I'm anticipating that for the most part, we're going to be talking about a general one-shot library orientation session, which basically says, here's the library. Here are electronic resources. Here's how you find basic information. Here's how Boolean operators work. So essentially giving them the basic tools of how to use both the physical and online resources that EPCC library system has. This is probably going to be the vast majority of the library sessions. Okay. Next, and this is what I'm going to strongly encourage instructors to do, make the session specific to an assignment. Because even though the data where they said, okay, well, our instructors who do the library, their students are scoring better, there's a lot hidden behind that, because a lot of the instructors who were reporting that their students use the library weren't just sending their students to the library for a one-shot library orientation session, but instead were sending their students to the library for a specific assignment, right? To work in support of a research paper or an information literacy assignment. So really, I think that because we're talking about the library and its resources in service of that goal of getting students to be critical thinkers of information and communicators of information, I think that that's going to be the most fruitful thing, to go in with a targeted mindset of, okay, yeah, we're going to introduce them to the basics of the library, but then we're going to help them start off research on a particular assignment. Then we also have, and this one I don't think will be as common, is an information literacy session. I actually do this with my classes. With Laura Leon Breeze, we actually developed a class session specifically devoted to teaching students how to analyze information using the SIFT method. There is a tab on that in the Understanding History LibGuide. And I think this is a really kind of cool session. Again, we'll see how many people opt for this method. But if you're especially concerned with general information literacy, misinformation, if you're concerned about like the history that they consume online, this would be a great session to have for your students. Another really cool resource that's relatively new is the Digital Inquiry Group, which started off life as the Stanford History Educators Group, which is a resource that a lot of history instructors, especially your dual credit and early college high school instructors, use. They have started to provide guided lessons on history and digital literacy. So I included a screenshot of some of their offerings, which have full-blown support materials. Basically, these are guided lesson plans, and some of them do involve particularly looking at history at social media, or how to do lateral reading, which is something that's very important in the SIFT method. So that could be another avenue too, if you wanted to maybe incorporate some of these resources into your session. The Digital Inquiry Group is entirely free. You just have to create a login. But again, especially if you're a librarian, thank you, Gail. If you're a librarian, Gail coming in clutch with the links today. If you're a librarian working with history instructors, I strongly encourage you to familiarize yourself with these sources, because a lot of history instructors will use these sources specifically in teaching students how to kind of parse out and analyze primary and secondary sources. So super helpful to be familiar with. The last option I would suggest is a guided research session. So this is a little bit more of it's kind of related to the assignment specific session, but maybe in this case, the instructor has two sessions, one where you do like an intro to the library and say, okay, we're going to start on our project. And then this assignment would just be a little bit deeper dive and resources unique to that particular assignment with some basically supervised free research time. Again, I don't think that this will be the most common option, but it's going to be an option I suggest as well. One of the things that we're really going to encourage history instructors to do is to assign some kind of assignment related to the library session. A basic reflection. What did you learn, right? What's the most helpful thing you got out of this session? Or some kind of, even if it's just like a basic like 5-question quiz, like what is a Boolean operator? I don't know. Some kind of assignment to get students to think about the knowledge that they consumed in the library and internalize it more. Again, this is not a requirement. I have seen a lot of instructors, though, especially the ones who use the modules in our pilot right now, I have seen instructors make that a condition, right? To kind of check, did they actually view the modules for those who chose the module option? All right. One other one that I'm really going to encourage instructors to do, but I don't think we're going to see widespread adoption in the fall, is embedded librarianship. So most of you guys attending session right now are librarians and know who this is or know what this is. But if you're not a librarian, you don't know what this is, let me give you a brief explanation. So an embedded librarian is basically a librarian that is dedicated to a particular class. They become essentially like a co-instructor, a co-facilitator of a class. Laura Leon Breeze and I have actually been doing a version of embedded librarianship since 2015. Um, it started off very small with my students going to her in the library for one session, and it has morphed into a very enmeshed method. So there are different ways you can do embedded librarianship. Um, in my case with Laura Lee, I actually put her into Blackboard as a teaching assistant. You can do this with a very quick and easy email to DLSS to say, hey, like I'm working with this, this person. Can we put them in a TA and just give them the CRN? That way, students can actually message the librarian without ever leaving Blackboard. You make it as easy as possible. With an embedded librarian, not only you could just have say, here's your librarian, here's the librarian at Mission Del Paso campus who we're going to say, this is the history expert, go talk to this librarian if you have questions. So you could do it just that way. I also, however, have multiple sessions with my students. So I have an initial orientation session that they do that is right before their first major writing assignment. So it's mostly a general orientation session, but the research examples we use are related to their first assignment. I did introduce back in fall 2024 a SIFT method session because I was really starting to see a spike in students kind of swallowing misinformation uncritically. So in my case, they have to learn about the SIFT method and then deploy it to investigate historical claims. So, like, for example, did Betsy Ross create the original American flag? Use your research skills to investigate. And then I also have a final exam research session because my final exam is a media analysis paper where they pick a film or video game and they write about how it portrays history. So that session is, again, a little bit more targeted with examples about resources and search strategies unique to that particular assignment, and then some sort of supervised free time for students where they can work on their research and have me and Laura Lee available to help them. Another example of embedded librarianship can just be as simple as a customized library research guide. Again, I always encourage instructors to develop close working relationships with their librarians. That librarians are super helpful in helping improve information literacy skills in any discipline. I am sort of the missionary to my department on that. I know Laura Lee and I have at conferences about our embedded, right? How did she recruit you successfully? And I can honestly say, having worked with Laura Lee since 2015, like I see the results. Like I know anecdotally, I know looking at my students' grades that my students generally do much better, demonstrate much better critical thinking, written communication skills when they're participating in these library sessions than when they don't, because I've compared the data of my students who actually do this and then my students who skip. And it's a very wide gulf. So that's the other option that we're going to encourage. Again, because of the way the history department is, they don't want to mandate that instructors approach the library in a particular way. So there's going to be a lot of wiggle room. So if you're a librarian and you have an instructor reach out to you and say, hey, I have to fulfill this requirement for my history class, my students have to work with the library, definitely offer them some of these things like, hey, I can set up a LibGuide for your class, or hey, like we could have more than one session if you want to, right? Or I can work with your students and be like their go-to. but know that they may not necessarily want to take you up on all of the things, but you can definitely offer. Okay, and you can always point to the library research guide that Laura Lee built for my class. So if you look at my name under research guides, it'll be the one that says like film, not Chicano film, but film, and it'll have all the history titles on it. You can point to that as an example, right, of a collaboration between a historian and a librarian. All right, so obviously history is hoping to get out of this intervention improved test scores for their assessment, right, and improved student information literacy skills. But one of the things that, as both a historian and a librarian, that I wanted to learn from this was how can we learn about how students use the library and how familiar they are with the library from this intervention. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to start looking at this at our pilot. So the history department doesn't necessarily always like to jump in feet first to a new initiative. They oftentimes like to pilot first. And so they decided that they were going to require this new mode of assessment, including the library intervention, for the world history classes in spring 2026. So History 23-1 and History 23-22. And just like History 1301 and 1302, they were divided between secondary source, primary source, which assignment, which one the assignment would need to focus on. And I decided to see, can we start getting data on students' usage of the library with this pilot? So what I decided to do was to create a survey using Microsoft Forms and to put it on the Understanding History LibGuide and to ask instructors who took part in this to have their students fill it out. Okay. So not every student has filled it out, but we've had 165 responses so far. And as you'll notice, looking at this initial capture of the results, you'll notice that most of them are from History 1302. Again, we don't have a whole lot of respondents yet. The other thing was, even though it's mandatory for the world history classes to do this library intervention this semester, we also strongly encouraged instructors to experiment with library interventions this semester so that they could kind of see what worked, what didn't work, and get ready for fall when it was going to be mandatory. So that's why you see a lot of History 1302 and History 1301 in the survey data from the pilot, because that's instructors who are being proactive, right? Who are starting to get to sort of see how this could work for their classes. I'm going to excuse my little placeholder. All right, so looking at the survey results is really interesting so far. Most of them had physically set foot in EPCC's library, but notice that almost a third of them said no, they had never been to a physical location of the library. Part of the reason that I wanted to ask this question, and by the way, this survey, a version of this survey is going to be included with the Understanding History LibGuide. So part of the reason why I wanted to do this was because, we need to know how familiar are students, right? Maybe, as you saw here, maybe they didn't go to the physical library, but they've played around with the library website, although you can see kind of similar responses to using EPCC's library resources online. Okay. And I saw Norma comment that a lot of the history instructors at Trans Mountain have started to come to the library. That's awesome. That means that their coordinator was doing a great job of being like, hey guys, let's go. Let's go. Let's be proactive about this. I love that. Hats off to the TM coordinators and people. All right. So that was kind of interesting to me to kind of see who was familiar with the library and who wasn't. And we also know, again, anecdotally from talking amongst the librarians, that there are some campuses that have a higher percentage of faculty who send their students to the library for sessions. Like, for example, Northwest, like most Northwest students, if you ask them at the beginning of a library session, which I always do, who here has been to the library before in a session like this, most of them will raise their hand. Like, a lot of them have been in like 6 to 8 different sessions by the time they hit their second or third semesters at Northwest. But that's not true of every campus. That's also one of the things that I want to ask in the fall version of the survey is, what campus they're associated with, because I didn't ask that question on this pilot survey. I wish I had, because then that would have shown us a little bit more of a breakdown. So also this asked, have you done any library training? And again, the vast majority said no, they had never had a library session before this. And that to me is interesting, right? That kind of shows us a potential for growth in the library, right? Outreach to help to support student information literacy in general, and our instructors in particular. I did put the name of the librarian that she worked with. You'll notice that a lot of this says Ambrise or Esmacher or some variation of my last name. This is why my Instagram handle is Dr. Smasher. Students never tend to spell my name correctly. But also put NA if you read the video modules. Again, once we get to the fall semester, we're going to start to see more diversity of the librarians associated. Like, for example, as Norma's saying, they're seeing students coming over to the Trans Mountain Library, but we don't have any Trans Mountain librarians' names on here. That may be because their students just didn't fill out the survey, right? That's fine. But what we're going to do is try to really push this survey out to instructors to give it to them, not just in the LibGuide, but also via email from their coordinators, and make it so that we have a higher participation rate. So the survey results were really interesting in that I asked questions. This was designed to get the students to reflect on their experience, even if their instructors don't actually ask them to fulfill a reflection assignment. So, for example, what did you find out most helpful about the library session? And you'll notice that a lot of them were like resources, information, research, books, right? Over and over again, when I looked at these responses, and this is just obviously the word cloud snippet of the most common ones, they were just like, I didn't know that there were so many resources that the library has, or like, I had no idea. Like, I went to the library to study. I had no idea that there were all these online databases, right, that had helpful information. So that was really kind of eye opening to sort of see the students realize, for those who had never come to the library before, hey, there's a lot of information here. Particularly asking them how what they learned in the library could apply to helping them succeed in their history courses. Over and over again, they said things like, for example, I can identify sources that would be helpful to use in my classes. A lot of them actually talked about source evaluation as well, which means that they were actually being taught about the SIFT method, which again is there on the LibGuide, but is not required for instructors to have their students learn about. So that was also kind of interesting to see that some instructors were like, hey, yeah, we like this, right? We're going to pick up this part of it. So that's also encouraging too. That's an early suggestion that the one-shot conventional intro to the library session may not be what everybody chooses. They may choose something a little bit more targeted. Oh, I thought I had one more slide. But anyways, so already 165 responses, again, for a pilot in which this is optional, in which we didn't sort of widely circulate the survey link. Instead, it's just been a handful of instructors who've had their students fill it out. I think it's been really eye-opening, and I'm really excited about the potential for this project, this joint partnership between the library and the history department. I think it'll be really helpful for history to achieve their goals in students performing better in the learning outcome assessment about analyzing sources and making written arguments using them. I think this will be a great opportunity to foster closer working relationships between the history department and the library, and also for the library to kind of get a better handle, given that pretty much all students, except for those in some certificate courses and some specialized CTE majors, all students have to take History 1301 and 1302. So the high volume of students that are going to go through the library as a result of this partnership is also going to give us a huge window into how can we better outreach and bring more students into the library. All right, so I wanted to end with enough time. So if anybody has questions, wants to pick my brain, Yes, Gail, or excuse me, Kristen dropped the link to my email on there as well. But does anybody have any questions for me that they'd like to ask about this from the history side, the library side, the student side? Hit me. Yes, Norma.
What would you hold on? What would you recommend really to try the first time with these incoming groups?
That's a great question. So, what I would suggest the first time with the incoming groups is to give them the initial intro to the library because, I mean, like I said, the first time I ever have a class in the library, I always ask who's been to the library before, who's had one of these sessions before, right? Now, obviously, if you get a classroom full of hands going up, being like, "Yes, I've had a library instruction session before," then maybe you don't go over here's how the library search engine works, here's how this works, right? You don't do that as much and you focus on a specific assignment. But this is where I would work with the instructor. I'm going to be encouraging instructors when I do the faculty development week workshop with Lauralee to reach out to the librarians beforehand and to ask specific questions to get it so that the orientation works ideally for their class. I'm going to anticipate that most instructors, just given kind of the early pilot data we're seeing where students aren't familiar with the library, most instructors probably are going to be looking for that one shot library session where it's like, here's the library, here's the resources, right? Here's how Boolean operators work, etc. I think it will be more effective if they can come to you with an assignment and say, give my students direction, but use this assignment as an example of searching. But and I would still ask them, like if they come to you and say, I want to do a library session, like informational, I would always ask them, is there a particular assignment that you would like me to help your students get started? But that's what I'm going to anticipate is that most of these instructors are going to be looking for that one shot library session and not necessarily doing a more tailored session to their class, even though I would hope they would. I can see, again, knowing the makeup of my department, I can see some people who are like, oh, this is a box I have to tick, right? And they're not going to invest a whole lot of time in like making it unique to their class. The other thing that I would strongly encourage you to do, wink, wink, and this is how Laura Lee got me initially, is also offer that you are an acceptable substitute if they ever have to miss a day, right? Like you can
That's a
send your
great
son to the
idea.
library, right? This is how Laura Lee initially got me. She's like, hey, you're going out of town for like a trip. I can cover your class, right? Because then that also kind of opens the door for maybe more than one session, right? Um,
Exactly.
so so yeah, definitely pitch it.
Yeah, will do.
Mhm.
Oh, and just to let you know, in January we had 13 sessions
Oh,
that were
awesome.
6 of them were History 1301, 7 of those were 2322, and Parkland High School really got involved along with TMEX.
So Parkland, it's Francesca Alonso, right? I think.
That I'm
Is that
not too sure. I'm not really good with
the names?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. There's one instructor, I think she's out at Parkland, who was at Northwest Early College High School, and she does tend to work with the library. So that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that the Trans Mountain folks have been stepping up and getting ahead of this.
Yeah, I was very glad too.
Great.
Thank you.
Mhm. Other questions? Comments, suggestions?
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I think this is a really good introduction to all of us for this initiative to work together with our history instructors. So, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing it.
Of course. And definitely, I'm going to encourage you guys when the Faculty Development Week booklet goes out with the sessions. The session that Lauralee and I are doing on this, which is going to be a version of this, but again, geared more towards the instructors, is going to be, I believe, Monday. So that's the 17th, I think. from 7 to 8. It's the reason it's so late is because there is always from 6 to 7 a history department assessment meeting, and they make it in the evening because they're trying to draw in the dual credit and the adjunct folks. So our hope is by scheduling it afterwards that we're going to be like, hey guys, like just stay online, go to the workshop. And so if you want to pop into that workshop, then we can start to kind of be like, hey, so these librarians who are here in session are at this campus. You can talk to them. Otherwise, we're going to kind of by default direct them to the head librarian of a particular campus. And then y'all can kind of decide who wants to work with individual classes. But yeah, we're trying to encourage them. Librarians are not scary. Please work with them.
Well, thank you so much. I would look forward to seeing that in the fall. And also for any students that are here, feel free to come talk to your instructors, come talk to your librarians. We're all here to help you achieve your goals. So there's a lot of resources you may not know or be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the history department is working with the librarians, because like I said, the history instructors who have been working with the librarians have seen just how much this benefits students, right? Like obviously it benefits me as a professor because I'm reading better quality papers, right? I'm not sitting here pulling my hair out from stuff that isn't well sourced. But also it's benefiting y'all. I mean, the other thing is like I've been doing these kinds of sessions with my students again since 2015. And I've had students who will take like multiple classes with me, have done this multiple times. And like I'll hear comments from English instructors who'll be like, hey, like I got your student in my English class and like they're way ahead of the curve, like because they've been exposed to this, right? So in other words, the success also translates across classes, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to do this, right? We want to make sure that students are prepared for success. I started out at a community college as a student all the way back in 2001, right? I made that transition to university. I always tell my students I design my classes and everything I do to help you guys prepare to be successful.
Well, that's awesome. We really appreciate that. I'm really happy for you and happy for the libraries. Now you are a full slated librarian here at EPCC as well. So we're very happy to have you with us as well.
All right. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to our Tejano virtual event and supporting all of our workshops. This is our last workshop for the spring semester, but we're going to be back on Friday, May 29th with our first workshop of the summer. And don't forget about the Tejano Passport Program. That is a chat link that I put a couple of times. So if you would look in your chat box, you'll be able to see the link for today. Just log in and you'll get points for attending today. And then those will go towards earning a medallion that you can wear at graduation. So again, good luck to everyone on your finals. And I hope you have a safe and restful break and hope we see you back again for the summer session. So y'all have a good weekend.